Hey, how you been? Good to see you. Welcome
It's been
here.
happening all day.
Good to see you.
Good evening, everyone. About any better now? Better now? Hello, everybody. I think we still had some people checking in. I'll do this. This is better. We have a number of alumni in the audience. Could I have our alumni stand up? And now they're reconnecting too. Also, I bumped into a student in the hallway and I asked if she was coming tonight. She said no because it was her birthday, but I told her she should come anyway. So, Rafaela, happy birthday. Did I need to do any other housekeeping? No? Any other birthdays? Also, there was one. So Richard Heist, the provost of the university, is in the room too. Richard, stand up. Thank you for being here, Richard. Shows the support that the university has for some of the things that we're doing within the college. So now I'll start. Welcome to the College of Architecture and Design at Lawrence Technological University. My name is Carl Dobman, and I'm the Dean of the college. Tonight is an opportunity to celebrate the hard work of our students. It's a time to reflect on the importance and the impact of good design. Tonight is also an event that marks a moment in time that we'll remember, that might be connected to commencement, awards, the end of the semester. For our alumni, partners, and faculty who are with us tonight, it might even conjure memories of when they were students. Certainly probably true for some of our alumni that are here tonight. And you lectured in this room before, you told me.
That's correct.
So last night, I went home and I pulled down that box. It's the box on the top shelf in the back of the closet. I assume that you know that box. I hope you all have one of these. It's filled with postcards, old pictures, sketchbooks, love letters, birthday cards, and other mementos from the past. I had to dump the contents of the box on the floor because it's not very well organized. After sorting through all of those objects, I found it, and I brought it with me today. Everything else from the box is still sitting on the floor of my living room, and I'm going to deal with that tomorrow. So I don't remember who told me to go to the dean's office. It might have been a teacher or a fellow student, but I was being summoned to the dean's office. As I walked up the stairs from the studio, I had to wonder if I was in trouble. So pause that, and then we're going to bounce back and forth between a couple of things. The first time that I saw Williams and Tsien lecture, it was in Boston. I was an undergraduate student, and I remember piling into a car with my friends. We left studio early to drive an hour and a half to hear them speak at Harvard. They talked about slowness. They talked about craft and materials. I remember them describing an exhibit that they had worked on, painstakingly selecting black river rocks to line the floor of an installation. But the stones needed to glisten in a particular way. The stones needed to be polished. The specification, after much experimentation, was for the black river rocks to be oiled by hand with baby oil using a white cotton t-shirt for best results. Is this right? This is a long time ago,
Okay.
Good craft requires dedication and discipline. That lecture was 30 years ago, but the description of those polished river rocks remains with me today. As I continued walking up the stairs to the dean's office, I wondered, perhaps I was being summoned because yet again we left studio early to go to a lecture. We all remember the painful projects that we were forced to do as students. For our students at LTU, that's typically the orthotope. One of those painful projects for me was the construction systems course that required us to build a physical model of a detail. At the time, I remember being enamored by a strange detail that I saw when I was at the Phoenix Art Museum, a building by Williams and Tsien. The window is a piece of glass that penetrates a thick concrete wall, and it's perpendicular to that wall. The glass glows. It's a magical detail. My teacher hated the detail because you can't do something like that in New England where it rains and snows. The building had been well published, but the drawn details, I couldn't find them anywhere. So I called Williams and Tsien. And that's a good note for students. Sometimes you have to pick up the phone and make a call, and this is still true today. I asked if I could get a copy of those details, and the response was, whoever was on the phone, was that they would look into it. I don't remember what detail I ended up modeling for that class, but I still remember that detail. Perhaps I was being called to the dean's office for arguing with my teacher that I should be able to model this detail for class, and I disagreed with my instructor. I turned on the switchback stairs. I walked up the stairs to the dean's office. I know, inching closer to the dean's office, I'm almost there. The Cranbrook Natatorium was completed in the same year that I moved to Michigan. This is a building that we continue to take our students to and visit today. When friends come to visit us in Michigan, we take them to visit that building. It's a beautifully crafted building. And in the introduction to the book, Young Architects, number 4, Material Process, Billie talks about the bricks that were used in the natatorium. It's a poetic description that makes an analogy to cooking and ingredients. She talks about her tour of a brick manufacturing facility where the bricks were being discarded. Within the hands of Williams and Tsien, those discarded bricks have been elevated to an incredible level of craft. There is the building, there are the details, and then there's the narrative of the people that build the building. Billie challenges us to think about the materials and details through time, memory, and narrative. So why was I being called to the dean's office? I wasn't actually in trouble that time. Instead, a fax had arrived. And I know I've taken a while to tell this story, so for all the young people in the room, just Google what is a fax machine. You might understand this better. But a fax had arrived. And so last night, I rummaged through the box of memories, and I found the fax.
Oh.
I guess you're applauding for my, archival skills, maybe. This is a completely disposable set of papers that seems to have accrued immense personal value over the years. There's a date on it, December 20th, 1993. A fax from Williams and Tsien with those details of the glass panel that penetrates the concrete wall. In reality, I'm sure Billie has no knowledge of this, and someone might be in deep trouble for sending those details. But maybe, just maybe, Billie might have been the one on the other end of that fax machine. It doesn't matter for the sake of the story or for this introduction. Todd Williams and Billie Tsien, through their incredible careers, have supported design education through their teaching, through their lectures, their work, and their dedication to students, evidenced by that fax that was sent to me in 1993. The work of Billie Tsien elevates craft and materials and teaches us that details can have meaning. Details can have stories and memories attached to them. Billie Tsien has inspired multiple generations of architects, including many of us in this room, and obviously myself included. I'm not going to run down the resume or anything. Thank you for being with us here tonight, Billie, and thanks for your incredible work. I'd ask everyone to please help me welcome Billie Tsien to LTU.
That was amazing. That was definitely the most amazing introduction I've ever had.
I'll take it.
Okay.
No, I did that wrong.
No, it's okay.
Your video won't play if I do this.
Oh, okay.
Anthony, what was I supposed to do?
Well, it's a huge honor and pleasure to be here speaking with you today. It was really wonderful to see the work in the gallery of all the students and to walk up and down the halls, see what you're doing, and as well to have some time with students at 3 o'clock today. I learned so much from listening to what you had to say and tell me about your lives and why you're doing what you do. So my lecture is titled, What Now? And no matter what position or where you are in a political spectrum, I would say this is a very confusing and unsettling time. And so I tried to think about what is it that architecture, how do you proceed with your work? How do you start to think about your work? What keeps you kind of on a sort of balance? So I'm going to talk a little bit about myself. So this is me growing up in a white suburb in New Jersey. And I always felt as if I were a little outside of everything. So I never really felt as if I were exactly a part of the place where I grew up. But when I was old enough to visit China, I realized I didn't feel a part of being Chinese either. So it's kind of position where you're somewhat outside culture. And I think in a certain way, architects, all of you who are studying design, whether it's product design, interior design, I think we all somewhat stand outside, apart from regular culture because we're looking at it through our own lenses. So I decided to go to architecture school kind of by a fluke. So students asked me, like, did you always know that you wanted to be an architect? And the answer was no, I kind of got into it sideways. I actually wanted to be a graphic designer, but there was an architecture program at UCLA and it was very cheap. So I thought, okay, I'll go there. And the first day I went there, they handed us a piece of paper. And they always do some little exercise as an incoming student to make you feel really uncomfortable and like you don't really belong there. So I got this piece of paper and they said, put it behind your back. And now you think of an elephant and tear an elephant. Well, it's not the original fax. It's not the original elephant. But I did tear it for this lecture. And what they were saying is, to be an architect is to have an idea, but to not really be in charge of making it. And so how do you communicate your idea, and how do you become partners with those who actually make it? Because it's never about a single person. So there is the myth of the single person. So this is, Howard Rourke, the master architect. You never give up, you never give in. It's only one person. Or for women, there was this idea that you had to be a diva and that you had to sort of in a certain way, forsake everything else and be just like a man. And I was in architecture school, and I thought, I'm clearly not ever going to be this Howard Rourke guy, and I don't think I can be the diva either. So I wasn't sure how I could ever become an architect. Because architecture felt like a really sort of straight line. Like you just picked your goal, you went down that line, and you ended up with a perfect circle. But architecture, I think, is really much more like that, especially if you become a parent and you're trying to balance your home and your life. But I also think this reflects the practice. So things, even as you're making them as an architect, they start to fall apart. Even as you solve problems, they start to come undone. And some of the best ideas are not a straight line, but come as a sort of tangent to the direction that you're going in. So you think you're driving to a solution, but it's sometimes the tangent that is the most important thing to consider. So I pulled out a number of principles because I'm saying, you know, everything feels unstable to me. What do I know about the way that I work, the way that we work, that will continue? What is the sort of line, it's a wandering line, it's a tangential line, but what is the line that I will follow? And so there are a series of things that are important to me, to us in the work. The first one is interiority. So I talked with the students about the power of working from inside out. And this was an amazing trip we were able to take to Ethiopia, to Lalibela. And these are stone-hewn churches. So this is solid granite where people came in, they dug down to about 35, 40 feet, and then they dug the cruciform, the cross, and they dug inside. They really excavated the stone. It has an incredible power, and it has no presence on the ground. It is only an interior experience. And that really brought home to me that one does not need to make objects that stand on the ground. You can start to think, you can start with the interior because the interior is very, very powerful. Another image, two of them, which I like to show together, has to do with the power of detail. So either you grew up with this story, or if you have kids, you might be telling this story to your kids. It's called Goodnight Moon. It's a storybook that basically details every single thing in this bunny's room and then says goodnight to them before the bunny goes to sleep. And it's basically written to try to put children to sleep. You sort of lull them to sleep. But what it does is it kind of describes the life of the bunny through the objects. So, you know, there's the bowl of mush on the table. So you know he has a little sort of bowl of something warm before he goes to sleep. There's, in the corner, there's a grandmother who's whispering hush. There's little mice in the corner. There's a little dollhouse with lights on it. So by looking at all these details, you start to construct the life of the bunny. That was drawn by an illustrator named Clement Hurd. On the far side is a painting by a Venetian painter named Vittorio Carpaccio. And he also described the life of a person, and in this case it's St. Augustine, by painting the study. And I think that Clement Hurd must have looked at Carpaccio's paintings because there's a kind of similar color scheme there and all of these objects. So in the painting, Carpaccio says, okay, St. Augustine believed in science because there's an astrolabe. St. Augustine has these books, so he was an intellect. But St. Augustine was also a very human person because he has this little German Spitz, little dog there. So he's describing the person through the objects around them. I think that detail is very much about telling the story of the project. And I think, as I said to the students today, for me, the story is the point where architecture starts. I also believe very much in the power of touch and what the hand feels. So of course with architecture, and especially when you're in school, it's what the eye sees, because you aren't making these things happen. You're working with your eyes. But in the end, it's what you see and what you touch. And so what you touch is very, very important to me. This is a studio in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, of a sculptor, a wood sculptor named Morton Esherick. He had, I think it was his either cousin, Joe Esherick was a very important architect on the West Coast. In any case, this was the most amazing staircase that I've ever used. You go down part way, and then you can change your mind and go up to a sort of middle level or go all the way down. And at the time, when we visited it, you were allowed to walk up and down the staircase. So walking down the staircase, I had my hand on the railing, and all of a sudden, it felt different. And I looked down, and I saw that this railing, which is very, very carved, had a mammoth tusk let into the wood. And it was the wood which was warm, and then the ivory, which was cool. And it was so striking and so powerful because you couldn't really see it, but you understood what was happening by touch first. So the power of what you touch, I think, is incredibly important. This is a handrail in my own apartment, and it was really fabricated by working with a blacksmith. So the blacksmith said, if you make this curve in the bar, it will stiffen the bar so that it won't be floppy as it makes its way down the stairs. And for me, that was a very beautiful detail because I love running my hand around the circle as I go down the stairs in the morning. I also believe, and I think this may be a kind of Asian thing, in the power of reticence. That often what you don't say means as much as what you do say. Todd would sometimes call me the Great Wall of China because, when I get angry, I get very, very silent and last for a really, really long time. But this is a show, and this is the Noguchi show, where we did rub the rocks with baby oil. But here, many of you know the Noguchi paper lanterns, and you know what they look like, and architects really love them, and they're crazily expensive now. But when he first made them, he believed that this was a way where people who weren't wealthy could buy his sculpture. In any case, the idea here was to make these fiberglass screens that would hide the sort of actual lamp at first. So when you walked in, you just saw the shape of the light that was glowing. And so what we're trying to do is be reticent with that, to sort of hold back the information. And this is a building that no longer exists, but was our first, and maybe our only building, exterior building in New York. It was the American Folk Art Museum. And there we used cast bronze panels that were cast at an art foundry to make a facade that felt both textured, because if you went up to it, you could see that it was cast and that you could see that it was very irregular, but also kind of hid itself a little bit so that you were curious to go inside and find out what was inside. And then the final quality I think is really important is humility. So when we're in architecture school, and I'm teaching in architecture school, it is your own vision, and often you do projects on your own rather than group projects. And you think that this is very much about your art. I think when you're in practice, you realize it's very much about the people you work for. And I think when you can be humble and serve your client, and then you can give them something they never expected, when you can transcend the answer, then you've made something worthwhile. So it's about both serving and going beyond the service. So I'm going to start with some small projects and then some current projects, and then talking about the Obama Presidential Center. So this is a collaboration with a cabinet maker named Stephen Eno and an architect who's based in San Diego named Jennifer Luce. And she was doing a museum called the Mingei Museum, which is a Japanese term for pieces that are made for use, but are also very beautiful. And so they were not art pieces made as art pieces, they were made as things to be used. And she said, well, can we do a bench together? So I said, sure. Well, this was not the bench. This is not what we did. However, it's a Chinese root chair. And it's kind of like a beautiful, ugly thing. It's pretty ugly mostly, but it's kind of got moments of beauty. And it's made out of these roots that are pieced together. But I was always fascinated by them because they're so sort of organic and kind of uncontrolled in chairs, which are basically a very controlled situation. Generally, you can't go too crazy with chairs. So these are the series of benches that I made. For various mobility reasons, for age, for being a small child, for carrying things, it's not always easy to stand up from a bench. And so these benches have these roots that have been made that act as a place to lean against. So if you're sitting at the bench and you want to get up from the bench, you push up from the root. And I was really happy that it was paired with this bench by Nakashima. So those of you who don't know George Nakashima's work, you should look him up. He was an incredible Japanese-American cabinet maker who made furniture which now is worth tons of money. But his daughter still carries on in the tradition of furniture making. So Mira Nakashima still runs the Nakashima studio. In any case, you would go there, and we went there thinking that we wanted to have a coffee table. And so you would go down in the basement, there would be all these pieces of wood, and he'd say, go down and choose a piece of wood. So I went down and chose a piece of wood, and came back upstairs, and I said, well, it's over in the left-hand corner, it's kind of shaped like this, it's narrow at the bottom, it's got a sort of crack. And he said, oh wait, no, sorry, I wanted a bench. And he said, well, that's a coffee table. And I said, well, no, actually I wanted a bench, kind of like with the back asymmetrical. He said, no, that wood wants to be a coffee table. And so we got a coffee table. But it was a sort of lesson in, it's the Liu Kahn thing. What does a brick want to be? You know, what does that piece of wood want to be? And he was very true to what that piece of wood wanted to be. So I went to Stephen, who's a kind of crazy cabinet maker. He bought this weird looking thing, a gigantic burl. And he never knew what he was going to do with it, but it was always hanging around his studio. And I said, let's use the burl to make a root bench. And so he hoisted it up in the air. That's Stephen, sitting in the studio and with two of the roots. The one in front is one that was cast from one of the roots. It's a bronze one, so that was made to go outside. And then slowly sliced away chunks of the burl, and then sliced away chunks of the piece of the chunks, and came up with these various sort of shapes. So he was sort of revealing what the root wanted to be. And then we put them on the bench and then sort of tried to see whether they were comfortable, whether they're comfortable to lean against, whether they're comfortable to push up against. And that's the bronze one over there. And in the end, created 4 benches, 3 with wooden roots and 1 with a bronze root. So, and Jennifer just made the very, very simple bench as a platform. So it was the 3 of us coming together. And I think one of the things that is amazing about architecture is that it's a collaborative activity. So it's never that one person. It's always so many. And the relationships between people is part of what brings great joy. So this is a project that's just opened. It's tiny. It's a small pavilion. That's the Brooklyn Bridge, and this is the Brooklyn side of the bridge. And where the yellow is, they needed to have a gateway, but mostly they needed bathrooms. So this is public restroom, and I feel very proud of it because it's one of the most public projects that we'll ever have because everybody will use it, and it doesn't matter about architecture. People will just use it. So we worked with Michael van Valkenburg, who drew this plan, and the earth is mounded up about 8 feet above grade. So he has these pathways that are accessible that take you up. And then there's this kind of egg-shaped pavilion on top of it with solar panels. And here are special public restrooms and a small concession stand. And then the sort of dotted circle is an oculus that opens to the sky. So Michael decided he wanted to plant ginkgo trees and linden trees around this pavilion. And for those of you, you probably know, ginkgos turn this brilliant yellow color. And so we decided we'd try to mimic that and use these penny tiles on the underside of the pavilion to make it feel as if you were both surrounded. It's like this color, one of my favorite colors. Surrounded by these trees, but also sheltered by these trees. And so this is a rendering, but, and we don't have the finished photos, but this is the first day, so we went up, that it opened, and we went up to the top of a hotel nearby, and you can see that these are all solar panels, so they will supply all the energy that's needed to run this pavilion. Then looking down, and then this is the view across to the Brooklyn Bridge, rendering of how people will use it, and then now suddenly people are using it. And what was really nice, that's us at the opening, the project architect and another person who worked on it. What's really nice is many people feel as if it's always been there. And I think one of the great things that happens with a project is when people feel as if it's not necessarily new, but has always been there because it fits right into the place. So this opened last year. It's a renovation of the New York Philharmonic Hall at Lincoln Center. So for those of you who might have seen the West Side Story or the remakes of West Side Story, it is essentially a story of a neighborhood that was where Lincoln Center is now. And that whole neighborhood was destroyed, and Lincoln Center was built during the Robert Moses years in New York City. And so what you see on the far side is the New York Philharmonic. Close to me on this side is the New York City Ballet. In the back with the red, incredible Chagall tapestries is the Metropolitan Opera. So it is a high culture. And it's sitting surrounding a great fountain that was designed by Diller Scofidio Renfro. But in its early days, it was the epitome of kind of high modernism, high classical modernism. So this was Harrison Abramovitz building, and Philip Johnson also worked on the interiors. So it was sort of quite glamorous at the time when it opened. But over time, it really became a kind of dead space and sort of felt somewhere between kind of a train station and the lobby of a big building that had insurance companies in it. And so they wanted to make it much more welcoming to people and bring in a larger audience of people so that they would feel comfortable. And also, very few people use ticket windows anymore. So the new head of Lincoln Center decided he was going to try to change everything and change the perception of Lincoln Center. So he took that great plaza and had an artist named Mimi Lien make an installation on it, which consisted totally of AstroTurf. And it became a sort of playground and a place where kids came to play and hang out. And then we were tasked with bringing a sort of new sense of liveliness and welcome to the public spaces of the Philharmonic.
Down on the faithful, inside the Pantheon. A total of 40 to 60,000 petals, each symbolizing a flame of the Holy Spirit.
So why am I showing you this? Because it was so beautiful it made me cry. So I happened to be there during Pentecost one year and watched the rose petals come through the opening. And so that image always stayed with me. And as I talk about these projects, you'll find that I'm less talking about the whole of the projects and more talking about the pieces of the projects. because those are the things that for me enliven it. So here, it made me cry, and I thought, what would be beautiful and glamorous? It would be to go to hear the Philharmonic and imagine rose petals falling from the sky. So these are drawings that were created in the studio that show rose petals, and they're much more dense on the top floor, and then on the next floor a little less dense, and then less dense on the bottom floor. And so there are 3 public floors in an atrium space that look down to a grand promenade. And when you stand outside the building, there's a sense that there are these rose petals cascading down on the walls. And it simply has to do with beauty. So we worked with a company that fabricated these panels, and they're made out of felt. It's an acrylic felt. So they drop, from our drawings, they drop small little sort of pebbles that are cut up of this felt on the ground, and then it's run through a machine, and the machine sort of needles it and ties it all together. We've also worked with a great woman named Claudia Youngstra who does natural felt out of wool, but in this case, for a number of reasons having to do with also fire retardancy, we needed to use this material. But they were able to translate these drawings into these drawings of the petals, and each petal is different, and there's sort of no repeat. So it really feels as if, as you walk around, there are these rose petals. So this is outside the main theater. And I also show these lamps. So this is somewhat of a family affair. My son is an industrial designer, so he went to Pratt. And we commissioned him to, and his partner, Tsien, to design these lamps. And so taking up this idea of petals, he worked with a company called Fisher Marantz. So Fisher Marantz is a lighting design company, and they design the actual lights, the pin lights that shoot up into the petals. And so these are really just acting as reflectors. But they sort of continue this sense of the petals falling from the sky. And what they also do is we made a new balcony, and it's being hung from the ceiling. So those very narrow vertical elements are actually steel columns that are hanging a brand new balcony. So there are a number of problems that it's taking care of. But they went through a number of iterations. So the first iteration was they tried to make them out of very thin pieces of alabaster, but it was too delicate and too heavy. And then they tried to cast them out of metal, but it was too heavy and too expensive. So then they went to these people, Zildjian, who make cymbals. And so it's spun brass, they're light, they're inexpensive, and by cutting them asymmetrically and then polishing them, they could get the reflectors. So I was very proud of him. And then we worked with Diamond Schmidt to do they did the interiors and worked with the acoustician to make shape the hall, but we designed the fabric. So the fabric is once again the variation on the rose petals. There are 4 different scales of rose petals, and no chair is the same. So it was meant to feel like a kind of flicker of roses. And you can see that once again, there's a kind of cascade of color that makes its way down to the orchestra. And in this case, this is my daughter-in-law, who's a textile designer. So her name is Emily Neal. Okay, we're getting a little bit bigger in projects, but I don't necessarily think bigger projects are better projects. They're just longer and harder. So this is going to finish in about 6 months, and it's been like an 11-year project. And the person who worked on this project has worked on this for 11 years, from when his kids were small to now they're in college. So Mexico City is huge. And it's an incredible city with so much richness and so much sort of diversity in terms of its architecture. A lot of it feels very, very closed in, but it's because it is a courtyard culture. So you walk along streets and they feel very solid, but behind the walls are all of these courtyards. So these are all the courtyards marked in red. So the embassy site is in an area called Nuevo Polenco, and primarily it was sort of smaller scale residential buildings towards the south, and towards the north there are starting to be taller buildings. We designed a building that is full of courtyards, and we worked on this again with Michael van Valkenburg. So all of the green, two things that we tried to do is bring light down to lower levels, because in order to make the building smaller, there are 2 floors that are below grade. And today we were talking in class about spaces that have no natural light, that are below grade. It's really a terrible place to be. So we have these courtyards that are bringing light down to the lower grades. So here you can see the model. It's fairly simple building, but it's 1 million square feet. So it's really, really large. This is the first courtyard, the main courtyard, and it's above grade by 1 floor. So it's a, Piazza Nobile. This is the other courtyards, and you can see within the main courtyard there are even lower courtyards. So the whole thing is sort of punctuated by courtyards. It's by nature a fortified building, so it has a very, very big wall around it. But we tried to use a stone that spoke to the warmth and the color of what you find in Mexico City. So this is a sandstone. It's very active. It's very striated. One of the things we really like are stones that have a lot of variation inside them. And even, I feel that in all the material we use. It's wonderful because nature is not consistent. It's wonderful to express and see the variation that nature gives you. So this stone is extremely varied in its coloration. And here you can see that there's a grade level, but there's 2 floors below, and there are big courtyards that go down to the lower level. And that one courtyard has a shaped roof on it because we wanted to both bring in the light, but at the same time, the light is very intense because it's at an elevation of about 8,500 feet above sea level. So we did a number of studies trying to think about how the light comes in, where it comes in, how does it go down to make it to the lowest courtyard. So this is a sort of technical drawing of it, then the rendering of it, and this is it's quite far along because this was, in September of 2024. But you can see that there's the stone and then the sense of drama, and this is that courtyard. The stone has always played an important part in the work that we do because it's a material that lasts and doesn't change, doesn't fade. And so here we're looking at both a travertine and a sandstone. Eventually we chose the sandstone. And this is a section where people who are coming in who are there's so many different entries. So if you're a Mexican national and you're asking to get a visa to the US, this is the area that you come in and you have to wait outside, and there's a whole bunch of things that you have to do. This is a piece of art that was done by Ed Ruscha for that ceiling of that same area. So he's going from galaxy to Earth, USA, state, city. I can't remember what the other ones are, but the final word is dot. We also looked at the art of Mexico City, and there's a lot of metal work that is both formed and punctured. And really we're interested in this work of, this was a piece, it's in the far back, but it's that sort of golden flickering piece that was done by an artist named Matthias Gerritz. And he worked with Barragan. And so for those of you who know the Barragan house, they're very strategically located pieces of panel that have gold leaf on them. And when the light comes in, it hits the gold leaf and reflects down into the space. So that came through the work that he did with Matthias Gerritz. So in thinking about the punctured metal and about screening and about sunlight and about the very sort of deep screens that a lot of buildings, both contemporary and new in Mexico City, have, we designed this screen for a number of reasons. Number one is that the sun, when it's high, is very, very intense. And so it's easier to sort of look down than look out because it's a very white light. The other one is it's a boring building because it's got hundreds of offices and the windows are all the same. So we wanted to, in some way, start to give texture to the offices, which would otherwise have been a flat facade. And then also to refer back to the sort of sculptural presence that we've seen in a lot of the contemporary Mexican work. So that's an earlier, just a hand drawing, and then it's sort of translated into a more technical drawing, and then a rendering of the screens. So on the west and south side, and actually the east side, there are these screens. There's no screen on the north side. And these were fabricated, so it's both bent metal, cast metal, and folded metal. So it's different kinds of treated brass and has become quite dark over time and will be provide a very dark facade. There's also a 16-foot wall that goes around the entire complex, and you can't put anything on the wall. It can't have any protrusions because people could climb up. It can't have anything growing on it because people could climb up. So it's really sort of overwhelming. So we decided to think about how could we make this feel more like a sort of mural. So this is a drawing that was done of this wall, and it's like hundreds of feet of wall, but it's a combination of both the travertine and then these basalt blocks that are placed on the concrete wall. With a mock-up, here we're looking at a number of different kinds of stones. That's the sandstone, but also deciding whether we're going to use other Mexican stones in between. And in the end, we just stayed with the basalt. And then we were also very influenced by all the Mexican tile. So we went with a very inexpensive concrete tile, and then these are compositions that were made in all of the bathrooms. Fabric and color is very important in Mexico City, and we love the sort of color block weaving that is part of the sort of textile language of Mexico City. And so we went back to the people who did this was earlier, to the Lincoln Center flowers, and had these color block, just miles of felt. And so the walls are lined in the office hallways of this felt, and then the doorways are just cut in as they need be. So nothing had to be really coordinated in terms of how the panels fell in. It was just kind of like a wallpaper, but it was to give you a sense of place. At least you could, in this miles of hallway, you could say, well, I'm next to the green and yellow and gray squares. And then the embroidery of Mexico is very, very beautiful, very vibrant, and use this as a pattern to do mosaics on the floor. So in many ways, we were trying to both ground the building, in other words, ground it and press it down, ground the building in terms of the general exterior color, and ground the building in the culture and the craft of the place. So I think one of the things that's always very important is to sort of understand not only the program of your building, but the story and the culture of the place where you're building. And that could be true whether you're making it in Southfield or whether you're making it in Mexico City, to really try to understand the culture of the place. So this is the last project I'm going to show. Let's see what time it is. We started a little late, so I'm trying to keep it down. But I love the introduction. And this is still under construction. It says 2025, but that's kind of a lie, so let's call it 2026. It's got about another year to go. So this was a competition with 7 architectural firms. And I hate competitions, and we almost always lose them because we're not very good at making image-driven projects. But in this case, we talked mostly about ideas. And so this was, can a building represent a vision? I don't know, but that would be the sort of goal of what this was about. And so I told the students today that often you try to come up with a kind of touchstone or words that you can come back to, or an object that you can come back to, or an image that you can come back to, that is your touchstone for the project. So, you're there solving problems, you're trying to think about what the section is, you're trying to think about what it's made of, but what is the generating idea? And so the generating idea for this project were these two words, ennoble and enable. And in many ways, we felt that the Obama presidency ennobled the country. This was our first Black American president. But at the same time, the goal of what he wanted to do is enable people. So there he is in Chicago, looking very young as an organizer on the South Side. So those two words were the words that we kept on thinking about as we did the design. So these are actually pictures from our presentation. So I know that the other presentations were much more sort of glamorous. We just were trying to get to an idea, and we said, okay, so presidential libraries have always been about telling a story, but there is no actual library at the Obama Presidential Center because it was a digital presidency, and they're not papers that you put in boxes because it was already digital. So everything else that wasn't digitized has been digitized. There is a branch of the Chicago Public Library. But most of what this is about are classrooms, because he wants to bring people here to learn about civic engagement. And in that way, it's apolitical. It's about how do you engage in the government, so it's not something that's foreign to you. This is something that is, part of our heritage. How do you participate, and what is your obligation as a citizen? So there's storytelling, which is the traditional way, story making, which is what's going to happen there. Rather than a singular building, we decided we would make a plural building, a campus, because we very much like to think about the spaces in between buildings and not as a kind of object unto itself. And then there are these objects that came along with the two words enable and ennoble. This is actually a small rock. It's about this big, and I also bought it when I was in Ethiopia. And I love holding it in my hand, and it's inscribed with some sort of characters. And it could have been carved like a week before I got there, or 500 years before I got there. It didn't make any difference because it's an object that has meaning to me, and it felt like it was so powerful because it was so compressed and had some message to it. Then there's a sense of a beacon, so we wanted the building to feel like a beacon, also the idea of a kind of underground railroad. And finally, the Obamas always talk about building on the shoulders of others, using the stories of others, so it's putting hands together so that other hands, can build on top of them. The site is the site, the enlarged site of what was the World's Fair in Chicago, the Columbian Exposition. And it's about 19 acres. And there was a very wide road that runs along the edge of it. And that road, we removed that road in order to make it more completely a park. And so once Cornell Drive was removed, then the lake actually connected to the lagoon, connected to the park. And this is Michael's drawing of the landscape. So it is a very active landscape. It's at the end of the Midway. So if you know Chicago, it was planned by Olmsted and Vaux, so that there's Jackson Park along Midway, and then this final sort of park here, which is where the tower is located, but the park itself comes up over the top of the building. So rather than seeing the roof of a building, you're seeing a landscape come up over the top of the building. There are 3 buildings: museum, a long, low building, which is the forum, and the public library, and the gray space is support space. And then there's a plaza that unites them. But underground, they're all connected. So it's one building underground. And once again, you see from the courtyards that one floor below ground has access to natural light. So it's a long, low building with a kind of tower on it, surrounding a plaza. And the building itself has as its belly the museum. And the museum, working with the exhibit designers, they didn't want to have any windows. So it was very, very difficult because it's a fairly big building, and in that way, without windows, it becomes somewhat mute. But this is not the way we design. So when they came back to us and they said we had won the competition, they said, but your building is not so interesting, because it was a little quiet, it was a quiet building. And so they said, could you make something iconic? And I don't think that I don't think you start out trying to make something iconic. I think it may become iconic. You just try to do the best job you can, but you don't try. But at the same time, I understood that we had to honor the fact that people would be coming here in the near present, but also in the future, where they wanted to pay homage to a person and a principle. And so that building needed to be probably more present than the buildings we ever did. So we ended up designing from the outside in, and it was really, truly difficult and horrible. And so these are all the models, and we sort of did them by sort of light at the top, nipped in waist, different shapes. One of the things President Obama said is that he really admired the artist Brancusi. So looking at Brancusi, trying to make something that felt elemental. Somebody said, did he give good, was he very involved? Did he give good criticism? And he walked in, and for anybody who is running a practice, the thing he said was, if I wasn't a president, I would have wanted to be an architect. And that always kind of gives you kind of sinking feeling if you're working for a client, because that means that they're going to have ideas. And so he would often draw on top of our drawings. And some of the ideas were not so good, but some of the ideas were really good. So this is also very much, this is where he drew on top of the drawing. But together, it sort of came together. He said, I want the building to feel interesting from each facade. So it's also a very different way of thinking, because it's, we tend to think very much about making things feel whole. And in this case, we were thinking very much about how it would look from different directions. So these are, 3 facades, all different. This is the facade facing the plaza. You can see that the idea is that the park comes over the top of the roof. So you're walking, you might not even know you're on top of a building till you get to a point. You look down, you see this depression, which is actually grade level, and there's a tower above. So this is this is one quarry with 2 different kinds of stone in it. Tapestry is a very sort of figured one. It's a little hard to see here. And then there's a quieter one called Kittledge. And we used both of these stones. We were very interested, as I said, in figured stones, but figured stones are more difficult to work with than consistent stones, because for those of you who are dealing with hanging the stone, when it's got little widgets in it, it doesn't react the same way all the way across. So then it has to be engineered so that there are more points that you're hanging the stone from than you might normally do, because you can't take anything for granted, because one little piece might act differently from the others. So it does cause problems when you use more configured stone. But here you can see the difference between the 2 stones, one more quiet and the other one more intense. And when it rains, it becomes really kind of crazy, sort of patchwork quilt. We also started to think about sort of making these marks in the stone, a kind of almost like something that felt as if you cut away from the original form, and in a way thinking a little bit about Brancusi. So we looked at these different bars and tried to think, can you apply a bar that makes it look like it's cut away from the stone, and used sort of engineered cuts and chiseled cuts, and really sort of like that sense of the chiseled cut, and like the sense of the hand. So all of these bars have been machine cut and then chiseled by a person. And so there's sort of these shadow catchers that kind of are scraped through the stone. And then one of the sort of final things I'm going to talk about on the building, the building faces south and west. And so we, once again, go to a sunscreen. We like sunscreens. And this was actually just thinking about letters. Like, you know, he was a person who's is a person who's very eloquent. And so this idea of words and the power of words and how important words were. But then over time, a committee at the foundation decided that they wanted the words to actually be a speech. So they decided that it would be a quote from the speech that he gave at the 50th anniversary of the March on Selma. This is sort of rendering of what those words are going to be. And of course, you can't actually stand there and read the whole thing, but I'm sure there's going to be a QR code there somewhere, and you can be able to see the whole thing. And this is, we're working again with Fisher Marantz to do the lighting. And I like this idea that you could stand on the top floor. So all the bottom floor and the lower levels are free, and the top level's free, and only the museum is going to be charging admission. But I like the idea that you could sort of imagine yourself inside the head of President Obama looking out through the letters to the south side. So this is working with a graphic designer, what I always wanted to be, but I turned out not to be, at Pentagram, and looking at how to put together the words. And it's really interesting because part of the structure of how this goes together is an idea of ligatures. And ligatures happen in doing typefaces where there are horizontal bars that connect the letters. And so with this idea of ligature, we can start to get a structure that would allow us to have these pieces cast in panels, and then the panels are then applied to steel structure, which is up on the side of the building. And then this is a section of all the letters, so there's this sort of flat side which faces in, and then there's the curved side which faces out, which has to do with shedding rain and hopefully pigeon dropping. Pigeons won't stay there. So we're always trying to solve all these problems, one side flat, one side curved. And then a rendering of the space. So this is a sky room. It's at the top of the building, and people will be able to come up here and just look back and have a quiet moment, because like so many of those museum experiences now, they're very digital and very intense, and we wanted just people to come back and connect to the outside. So this is a company in Virginia, a small company that casts the concrete using these forms. We originally thought it could be stone, but stone was too heavy, just like in my son's lamp, and also too expensive. And so it's going to be made, has been made out of high density concrete. And we use mock-ups a lot to sort of understand how best to make things and how things work. The stone is going up. It's a lot more clad than that, but still got a ways to go. And I'm always a little embarrassed, but this does show what it's like to sort of see the whole site, because we don't ever do fly-throughs, but the foundation did this. So you can see this is the lagoon. And there's an escalator that takes you up through the dark body of the museum. Then the sunscreen, the gardens. There's a parking garage which has on top of it a sledding hill, and Michael designed a playground, so it'll be a big playground. You can see Lake Michigan and the rest of Chicago to the north. And then the road has been removed and has become a sort of broad walking path. So from this side, it's a sort of quieter building, probably more kinds of buildings that we generally make. And then it ends in the plaza. So this is a farewell speech, but I use it to say that, you know, the hand, all of our hands, it's universal. We all share the same basic bone structure. And so this I believe in the power of the hand. I believe that we are essentially a kind of united people. We're all human beings. We all have someone or somebody or something that we love. And in the end, this always makes me slightly tear up, because these are the concrete guys in Virginia. So they finished casting all of the letters, and the letter panels are about 10 feet tall. And then, for no particular reason other than they felt like they wanted to, they took the words "we" and they cast this piece for themselves. And so they sent me the picture, and just like with a the petals at the Pantheon, I burst out crying, because in the end, we as architects serve the we as people, and I think that that's the good that we can do in the world. So thank you very much. Are we done?
I just asked Philip if we should take questions, and he said that was such a good lecture, let's not ruin it with questions. I want to thank you so much for coming. I think we have the exhibition opening. We've got some time to mill around and see these things, and I shouldn't offer, but you've been so generous today. I'm sure that if anyone else feels like they met you 20 years ago, they can come up and say hi, right? So, thank you for coming. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.